the depths of despair. James Holloway sat in his dimly lit apartment, the yellowing walls adorned with remnants of a life long gone. The clutter of unpaid bills, crumpled takeout containers, and dusty books formed a chaotic landscape around him. At 47, he felt like a relic of a bygone era, a man who had once aspired to be a prominent journalist, but had instead become a ghost, drifting aimlessly through the fog of his own despair. His mornings began with the same oppressive weight. The city outside roared to life, but inside he was suffocated by silence. A cheap bottle of whiskey sat on his desk, the only companion that offered a momentary escape from the crushing reality of his existence. Each sip was a fleeting reprieve, a whisper of hope that quickly faded into the shadows of his mind. One evening, as the sky darkened and the city lights flickered to life, an email pinged on his battered laptop. The subject line read, "Opportunity awaits." Curiosity piqued, he opened the message. It was from a company called Neuropharm, offering a substantial sum for participation in a clinical trial for a new psychedelic drug. The promise of financial relief was intoxicating, but a flicker of skepticism danced in the back of his mind. Desperation is a powerful motivator, he muttered, contemplating the risks. The internet was rife with horror stories about shady pharmaceutical companies exploiting the vulnerable. Yet, the thought of being free from his mounting debts loomed larger than his fears. He clicked the link, a chill running down his spine as he skimmed the terms. Vague potential side effects that hinted at something sinister. James spent the night wrestling with his decision. Memories of past failures invaded his thoughts. Abandoned dreams and lost friendships. Each recollection tightened the knot in his stomach. Finally, he succumbed to the allure of possibility. "What do I have to lose?" he whispered into the darkness. A few days later, a sleek black car pulled up outside his apartment. A tall man in a dark suit emerged, his expression impassive. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Vale, the lead researcher at Neuropharm. James felt a knot tighten in his stomach as Vale extended an invitation to the facility. "Think of it as a new beginning," Vale said, his voice smooth and almost hypnotic. "We provide everything you need. All you have to do is trust us." Despite his apprehension, the lure of financial relief was too strong. He reluctantly agreed, and soon found himself in the back seat of the car, watching the familiar cityscape melt away into desolate terrain. The glow of the city faded into darkness, replaced by an unsettling quiet that wrapped around him like a shroud. As they neared the facility, a sense of foreboding crept into his bones. The building loomed ahead, a dilapidated structure that seemed to swallow the light around it. Gone was the polished corporate image he had envisioned. Instead, he was met with peeling paint and cracked windows that hinted at neglect. The interior of the facility was a grotesque mockery of a hospital. Flickering fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow over the reception area, where a worn-out receptionist sat, her eyes hollow and devoid of warmth. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, mingled with something rot-like that clung to the walls. "Welcome," she muttered, barely lifting her gaze from her paperwork. James felt a shiver run down his spine as he signed the consent forms, pages of legalese that blurred together, each line a reminder of the trap he was stepping into. He was guided through dimly lit corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls adorned with abstract art that twisted and writhed, shifting in his peripheral vision. The facility felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud. The deeper he ventured, the more the atmosphere thickened, pressing in on him until he could hardly breathe. As he walked, he caught snippets of hushed conversations from the researchers. Words like subjects, experimentation, and results seemed to hang in the air, making his skin crawl. Each step felt heavier, as if the very ground beneath him was conspiring to pull him deeper into the darkness. At last, he entered a sterile room where the researchers awaited him. Dr. Vale sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 assistants, their unsettling smiles failing to reach their eyes. They wore clinical attire, yet there was something distinctly unhinged about their demeanor, a glimmer of sadism lurking beneath their polished exteriors. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Holloway," Vale said, his voice smooth yet laced with a subtle menace. "You're about to embark on a journey few dare to take. The drug we're studying, Spectramind, is groundbreaking, but requires a brave soul to truly understand its effects." James nodded, apprehension knotting in his gut. The assistants exchanged glances, their smiles widening as if sharing a private joke. He felt a chill race down his spine, a whisper of doubt creeping in. "Before we begin, we must prepare you," Vale continued, his gaze piercing. "This experience will test the very fabric of your reality. Are you ready for that?" James hesitated, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. Yet the thought of the money pushed him forward. "I'm ready," he said, though his heart raced with uncertainty. They led him to a small room, starkly devoid of comfort. A single bed was pushed against one wall, and a heavy metal door loomed ominously on the opposite side. The researchers instructed him to lie down and strap himself in. As the drug coursed through his veins, a wave of euphoria washed over him, followed by a sudden plunge into darkness. The sterile room dissolved, replaced by a cacophony of colors and sounds. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, whispering secrets and fears he thought long buried. But the euphoria quickly twisted, morphing into something far more sinister. Nightmarish visions flooded his mind. He saw his past failures manifest into monstrous forms, each one taunting him with every wrong turn he had taken. The walls of the facility faded, replaced by a hall of mirrors reflecting grotesque distortions of himself, mocking him with laughter that echoed endlessly. The researchers watched from the control room, their faces illuminated by the screens displaying his brain activity. James could feel their eyes on him, their anticipation palpable. He was no longer a participant. He was a spectacle, a source of entertainment for their twisted curiosity. The drug intensified his fears, trapping him in a hall of mirrors that stretched into infinity. Each reflection twisted into a grotesque parody of himself, laughter echoing around him like a cruel symphony. The walls closed in, the air thick with palpable dread. "Help me!" he screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the overwhelming darkness. Vale's voice slithered into his mind, a serpentine whisper. "You sought this, James. You wanted to understand. Embrace it." The line between reality and hallucination blurred. Shadows morphed into figures. Twisted versions of people he once knew, their faces contorted in agony. They reached out to him, fingers clawing at the air, begging for release. James felt a surge of panic. The facility was no longer a clinical trial. It had transformed into a prison of his own making. The researchers' laughter echoed around him, a cruel symphony of despair that wrapped around him like chains. As the visions spiraled out of control, he grappled with the ghosts of his past, his ex-wife's disappointed gaze, the laughter of friends turned distant, and the faces of strangers he had wronged. Each one was a dagger, plunging deeper into his consciousness, amplifying his torment. In the throes of his madness, a horrifying realization took hold. The drug was not just a catalyst for exploration, it was a weapon designed to exploit the vulnerable. He was nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game, a vessel for their sadistic curiosity. Visions of his life unraveled before him, each moment a dagger plunging deeper into his consciousness. He saw the love he had lost, the friendships he had abandoned, the choices that had led him here, each memory a tormenting specter haunting the corners of his mind. "You can't escape, James," the echoes taunted. "You chose this path." The facility breathed around him, alive with the cries of those who had come before. He was not the first, nor would he be the last. The thought filled him with a chilling dread, a realization that the researchers thrived on his despair, feeding off the horror that enveloped him. Hours, or perhaps days, passed in this hellish limbo. The drug took its toll, warping his perception until he could no longer distinguish between waking and dreaming. The researchers continued their observations, their unblinking eyes watching his descent into insanity. Finally, James screamed out, a raw, primal sound that shattered the silence. "Stop! Please, just stop!" But his cries fell on deaf ears. Vale's voice cut through the haze, a final taunt. "You were chosen for this, James. Embrace the terror. It's the only truth left." In that moment, clarity struck him like a bolt of lightning. The only escape was to accept the horror, to surrender to the abyss. As the walls closed in and the shadows danced menacingly, he let go. When he awoke, it was in the same sterile room, sunlight cutting through the grimy windows. The researchers were gone, leaving him alone with his shattered mind. He staggered to his feet, but the world around him felt alien and distorted. The echoes of his experience lingered, whispering truths he wished to forget. What had once promised salvation had become a monument to his despair. As he stumbled through the halls, a heavy weight pressed down on him, countless souls trapped in the same cycle of horror. The walls pulsed with their agony, their whispers lodged in the corners of his mind. James staggered toward the exit, but the heavy metal door refused to budge. Panic surged within him. He was trapped, just a puppet in their cruel game. The realization that he might never escape gnawed at him, a relentless torment that threatened to consume him whole. Days turned into weeks, and the facility became a labyrinth of nightmares. The researchers' laughter echoed in the distance, their faces obscured, their intentions forever shrouded in darkness. James was no longer the man who had walked through those doors. He had become a hollow shell, a specter drifting through a world of torment. Each reflection in the cracked mirrors told a story of despair, and with every glance he felt the last remnants of hope slip away. He began to see visions even when his eyes were open, phantoms of those who had been lost in the facility's depths. Each face told a story, a reminder of the lives consumed by the insatiable hunger of the researchers. One day, he encountered a fellow subject, a woman named Clara. She was disoriented, her eyes wide with fear. They shared their experiences, exchanging whispers of horror and regret. Together they plotted an escape, a desperate bid for freedom. Armed with newfound determination, James and Clara navigated the dark hallways, seeking an exit. The facility felt alive, its walls closing in as they moved. They encountered locked doors and security cameras, but their resolve only strengthened. "We can't be their playthings any longer," Clara urged, her voice fierce. As they crept through the facility, they stumbled upon the control room. With a surge of adrenaline, they entered, determined to confront their captors. But inside, they found only cold screens and silent machines, the researchers having vanished like phantoms. James hacked into the system, frantically searching for a way to disable the security measures. Clara stood watch, her heart racing. Just as he was about to breach the final lock, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors. "They're coming!" she hissed, panic rising in her voice. With no time to spare, they fled the control room, sprinting down the hall as the footsteps grew louder. The facility seemed to pulse with malevolence, the walls closing in around them. They reached a heavy door, its surface cold and unyielding. Desperation clawed at James as he slammed his fist against it. "Let us out, please!" The door opened with a creak, revealing a dark stairwell that led upward. They plunged into the shadows, climbing desperately, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. As they reached the upper levels, a sudden silence fell. James felt a chill creep over him. "What happened?" he whispered. But before he could answer, Dr. Vale appeared at the top of the stairs, flanked by his assistants. Their expressions were a mix of amusement and contempt, as if they had been waiting for this moment. "Did you really think you could escape?" Vale sneered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Trapped, James and Clara faced their captors. Vale stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You see, the drug isn't just about exploration. It's about control. You're not the first to try and escape, nor will you be the last." James's heart raced, realization dawning. The facility was a cycle, a trap designed to feed off hopelessness. "We won't be your subjects anymore," Clara declared, her voice shaking but resolute. Vale laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You've only begun to understand. This is your reality now." In that moment, James understood the true horror of their situation. The drug had altered not just his mind but the very fabric of his being. He was ensnared in a web of despair, a pawn in a game that had no end. As Vale gestured to the assistants, shadows crept around James and Clara, binding them in place. James felt the cold grip of despair tighten around him, the walls of the facility closing in once more. But in the depths of his mind, a flicker of defiance ignited. "We can fight this," he thought. "We are not alone." In a last-ditch effort, James summoned every ounce of strength he had left. "Clara," he called, their eyes locking in shared determination. Together, they focused on their memories of hope, their pasts, their dreams, the lives they had led before the darkness consumed them. With a surge of energy, they imagined breaking free from their chains. The shadows around them writhed, fighting against their resolve. James felt the weight of despair pressing down, but Clara's presence bolstered his spirit. "We are more than this," she shouted, her voice cutting through the darkness. In that moment of unity, a blinding light erupted from within them, pushing back against the shadows. Vale and his assistants recoiled, their expressions shifting from amusement to shock. As the light expanded, the oppressive darkness began to dissipate. James and Clara surged forward, breaking free from their bonds. They dashed past Vale, their hearts pounding as they reached the exit. The heavy metal door swung open, revealing the outside world bathed in sunlight, a stark contrast to the darkness they had endured. "We did it!" Clara exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. But as they stepped into the light, James felt a lingering shadow behind him. He turned, catching a glimpse of Vale's twisted smile, a promise that the darkness would always be there, waiting. Though they had escaped the facility, the scars of their experience ran deep. James and Clara struggled to reintegrate into a world that now felt alien. They were haunted by the memories of what they had endured, the knowledge of the darkness that thrived within the human heart. In the days that followed, they shared their stories, connecting with others who had been lost in the cycle of despair. Together, they formed a support group, a sanctuary for those who had faced the abyss and lived to tell the tale. James began to write again, his words a cathartic release for the pain he had endured. He chronicled the horrors of Neuropharm, determined to expose the truth. Each word was a step toward healing, a way to reclaim his voice in a world that had tried to silence him. As time passed, James found solace in the connections he forged with others. They shared their fears, their triumphs, and their hopes for the future. Together, they began to rebuild their lives piece by piece. Though the shadows of the facility lingered in his mind, James learned to embrace the light. He understood that despair was a part of the human experience, but it did not define him. Each day was a battle, but with Clara and their newfound friends by his side, he faced the darkness with courage. They had escaped the depths of despair, and though the scars remained, they were no longer alone. In the end, James Holloway became a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as the researchers at Neuropharm prepared for their next subject, the cycle of despair continued, but now there were voices ready to fight back, echoing against the darkness, a chorus of defiance that would never be silenced.